We end today's show with a look at the state of our economy here in the United States. On Christmas Eve, the Obama administration announced it was removing the $400 billion cap on Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac's access to the U.S. Treasury. The two bankrupt mortgage giants now get an unlimited draw on taxpayer dollars. The administration also announced that the chief executives of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac would get compensation packages of $6 million a year. Meanwhile, on Main Street, unemployment's in double digits and foreclosures are at 200,000 a month. I'm joined now by two guests. Dean Baker is an economist and co-director of the Washington, D.C.-based Center for Economic and Policy Research. He's a frequent columnist and the author of several books, including Plunder and Blunder, The Rise and Fall of the Bubble Economy. His latest column for The Guardian newspaper is Christmas Presents for Bankers. He's in Washington, D.C., and here in New York, I'm joined by Reverend Jesse Jackson. His latest article for the Chicago Sun-Times is called We Need Initiative to Rebuild America. Let's begin with you, Dean Baker. What is the Christmas gift for the bankers?
Well, you had this restriction previously of $400 billion on Fannie and Freddie, their losses. That's how much they could draw on the government. And you just remove that. Now, it's very hard to understand how they could incur losses of more than $400 billion. And this raises the question, what exactly are Fannie and Freddie doing? And what I suggest in that piece is that this might be a backdoor TARP. In effect, what Fannie and Freddie could be doing is buying the bad assets, that's what TARP was supposed to do, of banks, and paying too much money for them, in which case you will incur lots of losses. So this could be yet another big gift to the banks. The other part of the story, again, you had mentioned the salaries, the pay of these people. Originally, the top executives of Fannie and Freddie took big pay cuts, or government companies, and this is reversed now. They're getting $6 million apiece, and they're saying, well, we need that to get good people, which, sort of raises the question then. Timothy Geithner, the Treasury Secretary, gets $193,000. Should we infer from that he's not a very good Treasury Secretary?
Who are Fannie and Freddie? Explain.
Well, these were both corporations started by the government. Fannie dates back to 1937. Freddie, I think, was 1972 when it was started. Originally, Fannie Mae was simply a public company. It was converted to sort of a public-private company. They sold stock into it back in the 60s. The popular wisdom, and I don't know any reason to challenge this, is simply that Johnson wanted them off the government's books so that their debt would not be attributed to the government. But essentially what they did was create the secondary market in mortgages, so that previously, before you had Fannie out there, if a bank issued a mortgage, well, they would hold it for its duration until you sold the house or paid off the mortgage. What that meant was that it was often difficult for them they'd run short of money. They'd issue mortgages, they couldn't issue more mortgages. Fannie bought up these mortgages, gave banks repaid the banks for the mortgage, and gave them the money, in effect, to lend again. So this created a national market in mortgages, and this turned into securitization back in the 80s when first Freddie and then Fannie got into that in a big way, where instead of just holding the mortgages, they began to securitize them. They would guarantee the mortgage pool, but they would sell off interest in that pool to whoever, really all over the world. So they were the ones who got securitization off the ground.
You also write about, well, the man that Time magazine has named Man of the Year, Ben Bernanke, but you're not as favorable towards him, saying that while millions of Americans have lost their jobs, Washington allows the Federal Reserve Chair Ben Bernanke to keep his. Why are they rewarding failure at the Fed, you ask?
Yeah, well, I think that's a really good question. I mean, Ben Bernanke, with the exception of Alan Greenspan, is more responsible for this disaster than anyone. And it's kind of bizarre. I mean, he was the one who ran to Congress last year and said, if you don't give us $700 billion for the TARP, the economy is going to collapse. So he's saying his policies, along with Greenspan, brought the economy to the brink of collapse. And somehow we're rewarding this guy, patting him on the back and saying, good job. I mean, I asked the question, how could he have done worse? I mean, by his own admission, we brought the economy to the brink of collapse. If that's not failure, what is?
Reverend Jesse Jackson, do you agree?
Well, basically, we did not restructure banks, the board of directors, of their priorities. We bailed them out without any linkage to reinvestment, without any linkage to restructuring loans, not repossessing homes, churches and student loans. So, for example, they make money on the origination of the loan. They make money on the bundling. They make money on the bailout. They make money on private mortgage insurance. I wonder why for a long time they would not just restructure loans and not repossess them in homes. Well, they make money off of the foreclosure. The private mortgage insurance, they are insured 85% against the foreclosure, so that they, as the home goes, they keep that level, and the borrower is paying the lender's insurance. It's utterly corrupt. And so while we are restructuring, not bailing out Wall Street, at the bottom, the hemorrhaging of churches and jobs and student loans is unacceptable, and therefore we need a big idea. TVA electrified the rural areas. The New Deal dealt with banks, or even Great Society. And we need a big idea, not just a trickle down for those at the bottom. We need to restructure our economy bottom up. An urban, rural policy, and maybe reconstruction banks that are manageable and within the law, not banks unmanageable and operate outside the law.
Do you see your fellow Chicagoan, President Obama, going in that direction? And many say he's surrounded himself by the very people who created the problem, from Timothy Geithner, moving on to Ben Bernanke and others.
Well, New York has shifted down to Washington. It had Wall Street, now it has the government. Now we must use our street power to change it, to bring about the change. You know, change always, based on Amy, comes bottom up. You know, Roosevelt was not who he was until the people hit the streets. It changed. President Kennedy was against the March on Washington, not hostile, but against it. And so Dr. King was for Kennedy over Nixon, but we still had the March for a Public Accommodations Bill. He was for Johnson over Goldwater. We still had the March for the right to vote. So the people still yet have power to fight priorities. We're going to meet with at the Wall Street Project this January 13 through 15, confronting banksters who they either lend the money or they lose the money.
You call them banksters?
Well, that's what Roosevelt called it, a combination of banks and gangsters. They use their power to do what? To disallow the Senate from letting judges modify laws. They used their power to neutralize the Congress, which was the overseers. And then they circumvented fair housing laws and fair lending laws and CRA. And then they got stimulus money. We made Bob Jones University honor Title VI. Wherever there are federal monies, there are federal laws. They were able to circumvent those laws that Bob Jones got enforced on. So EEOC, contract compliance, all the affirmative action, those basic laws, they were able to operate outside the law. The result is now you have fewer and fewer, getting more and more, the middle class sinking, and the poverty base is expanding. So we want the Attorney General more actively involved in making them adhere to the law. Two, we really want we need to have some reconstruction banks that are manageable, bottom up, and need to have some direct investment in these cities in rural America.
What are the unemployment figures? People gasp when they hear 10%. But I mean, in the black community, for young black men, aren't we talking somewhere near 50%?
Well, in the Chicago area where the president was an organizer, in the Inglewood area now, it's around 30%. Youth is more than 50%, and New York is more than 50%. So these have been depression level numbers for a long time, and you need some direct intervention. 4.9 million Americans, 4.9 million are food insecure. That is that they cannot eat predictably 3 meals a day. And of course, many of them, jail becomes a hotel. At least in jail, it's warm in the wintertime, cool in the summertime, organized recreation. They jump up and touch the bottom. There must be some direct intervention. I think about this whole issue about Afghanistan. We said Afghanistan is urgent. Timetable is a priority. We need a budget, economic reconstruction, and security. We need that for American cities. A budget, a sense of urgency, timetable, reconstruction, and security. We need that type vision at home.
It may be that a lot of people thought that's what they were voting for, getting away from war, bringing those resources back home, from health care to issues of global warming and the global economic meltdown, jobs at home. What is your assessment in this first year of President Obama?
Our plan for Afghanistan is clearer than it is for urban and rural America at this point. And I'm convinced that we as a people, fighting to get a broader health care coverage was the right fight to fight. That fight is not yet over. Going into Afghanistan, expanding to Afghanistan has reasonable doubts, more doubts than reason in my judgment. But more than that, basic urban America has felt now the impact of a sinking middle class, people who've lost their homes. I was yesterday in Prince George's County, churches in foreclosure, record-breaking numbers. those churches that had to build affordable housing because HUD stopped building houses, those churches that built the Life Center back in the Ys in those communities, those churches are now facing foreclosure. And